I literally had someone tell me that she did, this was after a major surgery I had in 2001, that she did not visit me after surgery, but that she sent healing thoughts to me in yoga class.
Somebody literally came up to me and was like, if your relationship with your parents were better, you wouldn't be sick. Like somebody who
Wow.
barely knew me, who has
Significant
never met my
variation, yeah.
family. And it, there was a spiritual kind of element to the way she talked about it. And, these people don't know the story of our lives. Like,
Generational curses. That's why you're ill, because of a generational curse. I've been told that. Hello and welcome to Post-Exertional Mayonnaise, a podcast about living with ME and chronic illness, creativity, and making meaning. Litsa's here and Dov's here, and today we're going to talk about chronic illness and toxic religion, culture, spirituality type things. So yeah, there's a lot of sort of take in with that, and we will be sort of discussing sort of emotional and spiritual harm. So. A bit of a content warning if that's something that's going to be sort of a challenge for you. But yeah, Bring a Thing. So Bring a Thing is just a small segment that we've got on the podcast where we just talk about anything we want to, really. So, what have you brought, Litsa?
I will backtrack to last week when Dove recommended 070 Shake, and I've been listening to Petrichor. So good. So thank you for the recommendation. And last week when you mentioned her, I was like, I'm pretty sure I know who we're talking about, but I didn't want to sound like the old Gen Xer. I knew who she was because she'd done a remix with Madonna about 3 years ago. So,
really?
yeah, they did a remix of Frozen.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Madonna's song. I was like, I'm pretty sure this is who. And then I looked it up. I was like, yes, we're talking about the same person. So per Dove's suggestion, I've been listening to Petrichor, and it's phenomenal. Just absolutely.
I have as well, actually. It's been
I wanted to listen. Oh, yeah.
Oh, no, go ahead. Daniel, I think you'll really, really like it. It's a great album.
Yeah, I was just saying before we came on that I'm sometimes listening to music before I fall asleep, and then I'm just drifting off, and there's a track that sort of like really hits hard. It's like halfway through the album, and I'm like, oh, okay, let's go. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, there's some soothing parts and some parts that are a little.
Yeah,
do you like the Courtney Love?
Courtney Love, I do.
Yeah.
And it's kind of cool that she's now recorded with two Gen X icons. So that would be mine. And then I've been revisiting the comedy The Other Two. It was kind of a cult hit. It ran for 3 seasons here on Max, which used to be HBO Max. It gets compared to 30 Rock a lot. It's a New York show business satire, but with a gay male lead. And it ran for 2 seasons, and then they had this huge 2.5-year break because of COVID. And then they come in season 3 and somehow managed to make COVID in show business funny, which you would not think was possible, but it worked. So definitely recommend that. Kind of going to Dove's point before we started taping, it's been kind of dicey on this end too, so I don't have a ton to recommend. But I would go with the other two. Well, Petrichor from 070 Shake. The other two, it's streaming on Hulu and Amazon as well as Max. Dave Grohl's The Storyteller. I'm coming off of reading a lot of masterpieces that were also very heavy. Octavia Butler's Parable of the Sower, and then Larry Kramer's The Normal Heart and Destiny of Me. And I just needed something light. And it's a great rock and roll memoir. It doesn't require a lot of concentration. He is a wonderful storyteller. If you love Dave Grohl, it's yay. And then because I'm sticking with my McCartney, I just love the Beatles. It's the 50-year anniversary of Venus and Mars, so I've been revisiting that with McCartney and Wings. And also it's the 50-year anniversary of David Bowie's Young Americans.
Wow.
Yeah. So those are mine.
What was the McCartney that you talked about last week? Last time?
Last time it was Ram.
Okay.
And now it's Venus and Mars.
Brilliant.
I meant to write that down, and I forgot.
It's okay. You've got other stuff going on.
So, Dove, have you got a thing?
Well, last time I talked about Josh Johnson, and he's still one of my go-to comedians just because he's just sort of a low-key storyteller who has this amazing way of planting seeds and then they grow. You're not sure like how he'll like say things and you wonder how they're going to come together, and then he usually brings them together in a kind of clever and fun way, and they're very, I think he's really good at making up stories that sound real, or he's had a very interesting life that he's able to, I'm not using the word mine in sort of a, I know it's a questionable word, but he's able to mine sort of his life history for in ways that he can then use to connect with things going on in the larger world in ways that are really I find enjoyable, and I find it a way to sort of take in things that are happening more sort of philosophically, rather than when I'm on Blue Sky and it's just like this happened, that happened, this happened, that happened, all the shit's happening and it's bad.
He's really, in addition to being devastatingly funny, he's so insightful. And like you said, he'll draw it all. He draws you in and then he connects everything.
Yeah. And he'll tell like a personal story that's seems very unique or not small, but like very specific, but he'll always sort of connect it to bigger meanings, which is, what good writers do. He's clearly they're essays. They're kind of essays. And I've always been a little envious of essay writers for the way they're able to do just that. And he's very prolific. He's just like a prolific, beautiful, talking essay writer.
Lots to dive into. Yeah, you need to keep nagging me to make sure. You need to tell Daddy. Yeah, because otherwise, I'll just.
He's not like other comedians that Dan and I have sent a lot of like comedy clips back and forth, and a lot of. And I don't think any of the other comedians are quite. I mean, no comedian is. I guess there are some knockoff comedians who just sort of take on the persona of other people, but I think all the good comedians have something original about them, and
definitely.
But I think that there's something very he's because we've watched I'm trying to think of the comedians that we've sort of sent back and forth, like the who are those two British guys who and then, sorry, some
from
stuff
way
that's
back,
like
I can't remember who I've sent you. Who have I got you into?
Fry and Laurie from way back.
Well, no, but probably those two. I like Laurie and Fry, although I get angry at Stephen Fry a lot for being sort of on the conservative side. I find him he's brilliant and fucking annoying.
Yeah.
And he often sides with J.K. Rowling and just,
Yeah, of late he's not. I met him years ago when I was a publicist with the Seattle International Film Festival, and he was so gracious to all of us. And he could pronounce my name right on the first try. So that's my Stephen Fry story, but that was 1998. So, people evolve and change. And
Interesting.
I wish he would grow, more politically engaged and compassionate rather than, he's kind of like, but anyways, yes, Laurie and Fry. Another two who's a bit younger that I'm forgetting their names, and then Rowan Atkinson doing like Bible. He makes a lot of we've often sent back some I guess religious, which it kind of goes along with today.
We go through some phases, don't we? Yeah. Yeah, so the Bring a Thing goes all sorts of places that we didn't.
I'll let Dan take it away.
That's fine. My sort of musically, I've been listening to Bleachers, an album by Bleachers, which is just fantastic if you just like listening to really chilled out stuff like me that doesn't take too much thinking.
What kind of music?
Sorry, what? Sorry.
What kind of music?
It's quite I don't know what you'd class it as, like garden indie or something like that. It's like I'll send you some. Bleachers by Bleachers, American guy. He's a producer as well, so he produces lots of stuff. Jack, I've forgotten his name. I don't know. I just Bleachers anyway. Yeah, I'll put a link. And I think you'd like it, Dov. And this book, so this kind of segues into our topic today. This is Everything Happens for a Reason, and Other Lies I've Loved by Kate Bowler. It's a New York bestseller from 2018. And so lots of Kate Bowler was a professor at Duke's Theological University, and she's done studies into prosperity gospel. But she's talks in this book about her own experiences of having cancer, and lots of people coming to her with reasons why that's happened, and so that's why the book's called Everything Happens for a Reason and Other Lies I've Loved. And I think for those of us living with ME or chronic illness as well, I would imagine like every person listening to this podcast has had an experience where somebody's given them a reason for why they're ill.
Yeah.
So we can all relate.
Talk about relentless.
No, I was just going to read a tiny little snippet, presuming that I can, hopefully. Maybe I'll have to go and get Kate Bowler's permission. She says, this is the appendix at the back, and she's given just different things that people say, and this is Everything Happens for a Reason. The only thing worse than saying this is pretending that you know the reason. I've had hundreds of people tell me the reason for my cancer because of my sin, because of my unfaithfulness, because God is fair, because God is unfair, because of my aversion to Brussels sprouts. I mean, no one is short of reasons. So if people tell you this, make sure you are there when they go through the cruelest moments of their lives and start offering your own. When someone is drowning, the only thing worse than failing to throw them a life preserver is handing them a reason. And I just
Oh, that's good.
It's so good. So yeah, this book is absolutely fantastic. It's not. In fact, I don't really read an awful lot now. I just don't have the kind of capacity. So I went through, when I first became ill, I went through sort of like a real phase of reading, just like all sorts, like and this is one of them. And it's a lovely book about her own experiences, and it's very personal. But I could relate to it so much as becoming ill with ME and. The whole kind of sort of having to try and make sense of being ill, like why? And that's one of the biggest questions, isn't it, for us? So,
does she talk about how we try to find meaning, or mostly how other people try to sort of find meaning in order to not feel vulnerable or whatever?
I think for her in the book, it's around this whole concept of that like everything happens for a reason. So other people kind of like imposing the reasons for their
but they graft their
cancer.
reason onto us.
Right. Yeah. It's like a lot of projection, a lot of sort of projection of people who, instead of thinking they're embarrassed disabled people, think they're embarrassed billionaires. Sorry.
Yeah.
I mean, disability is very common. And it happens to a lot of us, if at some point, and people want to keep that information as far away from themselves as possible, maybe, or I don't know.
Yeah. So that's that's Kate Bowler, and I thought it was a good.
Do you want to hold it up again, just so we can really
if you can see
take a look at that cover?
That's the hardback,
I love
which
that cover.
I got on a really good deal when I got it. So you can probably get a paperback now. Yeah.
Have you listened to any interviews or anything with her online?
She's got a podcast called Everything Happens, which is a brilliant podcast, and I haven't listened to it for a while. But it's just so good. It's not faith based as such, but it's talking about some of the really challenging issues in life, really. So we're going to talk today about chronic illness and toxic religion and spirituality, and that's a little bit what Kate Bowler has been looking into. And we did just want to say we're not therapists, so we're just friends having a chat basically about some of these. It's quite heavy issues, really. And if it's not your thing, then feel free not to listen, and we're not going to be offended. But also I want to say at the outset that if religious or spiritual practices are like really helpful to you, then that's absolutely brilliant. And if there's things from religion and from kind of spirituality that benefit your life and our lives, and then they go for it. But we're kind of specifically talking about the things that that can actually really impact us and give on top of the layer of living with ME or chronic illness, giving this extra layer of probably like quite emotional stress and a religious trauma potentially as well. So there's some quite heavy themes here, and like I haven't really talked about my experiences before in this area, and I'm not going to talk about my faith deconstruction in any detail, but there was a massive sort of challenge for me. I'd been living adopting Christianity for most of my life, so that was very central to my life. But then the chronic illness comes along, the ME comes along, and you have to ask massive questions. But you can also be faced with the external things from the religion, and need to like conform, and then the internal things that you adopt yourself, which the religion kind of like just imbues upon you over the years, sort of thing. But suddenly the religious text can become sort of weaponized, and the belief systems become kind of like weaponized.
And that's what we're focusing on, like you said, when it's weaponized, because there's so many good people of faith, and the three of us have different belief systems, and we'll get to all that, but no one is issuing a wholesale condemnation of anyone of faith. What we're talking about is when it's weaponized against vulnerable people.
Yeah, which I saw an interesting art. This is not the thing I was talking about. There's something on Blue Sky that was relevant to this that I wanted to bring on that I can't remember, but I did see something that was about, my God, I think it just went away. Oh, that's what it was about. It was about, why there are so many disabled Republicans voting for people who want to take away their social safety net. And one of the reasons is the way that Republicans, I'm talking, me and Litsa are in the US and Dan is in England. And I know all our viewers are from all over the world, and you all have your own political situations, and you probably all sadly know what's going on here in the US, and it's not good. But the person who was writing was talking about how, first of all, they do a good job of pretending they're not eugenicists by saying that they don't believe anyone should get an abortion. So I guess there's some narratives about how disabled people should not have children that gets in some way sort of blamed on the left. I don't know how that is. So, but the other thing was that that Christianity, how Christian groups will kind of swoop in and help people here when they're disabled in ways that a lot of other organizations won't, and so they're very good at recruiting disabled people. And I don't know. I mean, it was a much longer article, and it was really interesting. And along with this topic, that it's like people don't want to actually support disabled people. They just want to throw at us platitudes, and often abusive platitudes, like about sinning and about, I guess there's a show right now, something to do with vinegar. Like you just need to drink apple cider vinegar, or the spiritual stuff. But I found that really interesting, how there are certain religious contexts that give disabled people a kind of support that they're not getting in other places. And often it's not in good faith because they're being recruited, but it's still something to be, it says a lot about our culture that so many people have so little support.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. I think I've sort of made a little list of things that that many of us can sort of feel that we're ill because of, and that often religion will say, and these are things that have been said to me, which is sort of a significant part of me stepping away from faith, because suddenly lots of things didn't make sense anymore, but also because of the pain that comes with the sort of the blame of being ill, really. That even if it's not spoken, it's often very silent and unspoken, but it's the things that can be taken on board because of the nature of the religion itself. So yeah, things like sin, there's sin in your life, a lack of faith, unforgiveness. That was one that personally for me, that somebody said to me, "Have you got unforgiveness in your life?" So the idea that you're not being healed or you're ill because you haven't forgiven somebody, and you need to forgive somebody. So
Well, that
therefore,
makes me
that will
so
clear
mad.
some
Well,
sort of
and also
spiritual
by that
blockage.
metric, every person on Earth would be ill or disabled because everyone's
Exactly.
got someone that
It makes no
Right, and
sense.
everyone's got someone in the back of their head. It's like fuck that person. So that's
right.
Yeah.
And also it's like forgiveness isn't a thing. It's a process that's different for everyone. It comes and goes. Like people,
It's
I
not an
think people
obligation
sort
either.
of we could talk about that in itself
Yeah,
for
a
I'm
long
sure for
time.
hours,
Yeah.
but it's
Um,
basically that is a ideology that always supports abusers and abusive systems.
always.
And so it's cruel and it's bullshit. And I think it's very important to not forgive people a lot of the time. And I think people also sort of make this unnecessary equation between like inner peace and forgiveness. Like I can have a
and that's not just
relatively
a
peaceful
Christian
life
thing
and
either, is it?
still not forgive some fucking people.
That's
And
a
that's
really point. Yeah. And I think we all agree on this. When we're saying there are a few individuals we have not forgiven, we're not harming them in any way. We have jettisoned them from our lives. So we're not, no one in this podcast is harming anyone or advocating the harm of anyone. But there's some people who are so deeply cruel and have been so deeply cruel repeatedly, it would be stupid for any of us to keep them in our lives.
right. And it's important to and because forgiveness is not an actual thing, like what does it mean to forgive someone? I don't even know. Like
It's not tangible, is it?
it's
not.
such an abstract comment.
Yeah.
Abstract.
Concept?
Thank you.
Is that the word? I don't know.
Hello, Emmy.
Yeah.
It's such an abstract concept that gets treated as if it's a very specific thing that we are all supposed to do so that we're not holding any bad feelings towards anyone, which is absurd. But anyway, sorry, go on, Dan.
No, yeah, or that just you become ill because you haven't forgiven somebody, and it somehow affects you. This sort of mind body connection that gets sort of taken to the extreme. But
The mind body stuff.
generational curses. That's why you're ill because of a generational curse. That I've been told that.
You're kidding.
Yeah.
I haven't gotten that one.
Have you? No, I must have told you that one.
Daniel, if I recall correctly, you got ME when you were very young, and then you kind of had a protracted remission of several years, and then it returned when you were older.
Yeah.
So did people then blame you when it came back full force?
I
Did
think
they blame you like, oh, if you'd said more prayers or if you'd done this or if you'd done that, that's why you got sick again?
I wouldn't say other people said it, but I internalized a lot of those things. So for me, one of the big things was that I became better when I was in my late teens. Something I haven't talked about really, but I believed due to like healing. So that was my like healing testimony sort of thing when I was going on, had 20 years free from ME, and then it hit again when I was 36. So not anything. I did have. Thank goodness it's not cancer. Obviously, that was one. But beyond that, which again is another thing. It's like, well, what does that mean? So yeah, generational curses.
Never anyone who has, and I'm saying this as someone who has ME and cancer. It's never someone who has cancer who says it. It's always jackass who has nothing, who decides to grade all the illnesses, and it's like, okay, you're walking around fine. If you can't say something kind, just shut the hell up.
Yeah, and in that circumstance, I knew what ME was and what it was like and how it could impact me and how that might impact me for a very long time, and because I'd lived through it, and so yeah, it was my worst nightmare, and then sort of further down the line, somebody tells me that or that there's a generational curse.
Was that someone from the Christian community?
No, from the Christian community, but yeah, somebody that I didn't really know very well.
What did they mean by generational curse?
Well, they prayed against the generational curse, so for me, that means the same as telling me, because you're telling somebody something through the prayer, aren't you? So, yeah, just I don't know what that means. It means it's a biblical thing from the Old Testament that
Okay.
one generation, there's, well, even God says it, I think, at times, for the next 1,000 generations or whatever, because of his
Right.
anger or, those sort of things. So.
So that's how they were
Um,
tying it in with ME, that this was part of something that had gone back
I guess so.
streets, and that's
I mean, that's
sick.
something I'd heard talked about in the past. But yeah, that was the first time it was prayed against over me because of, so that was a big part of me questioning faith. And
Did people, when you got sick the second time, did people say, I'm going to pray for you? Or was
oh yeah,
there?
lots of people would say they would pray for me, but ironically, I'd rather they would have actually just, texted me and asked me how I was, because
Right.
that would have meant more to me than just
Right.
somebody saying they'd pray for me. So, funnily, even though I was living as a Christian then, I wasn't going to get in this deep, but it's interesting. It's just the things that that are actually you can normalize, and then suddenly
Exactly. Normalize is the exact word. It's so strikingly common.
So generational curses, not praying enough, lack of repentance. There's sin in your life, but there's effectively sin in everybody's life because everybody sins. So why do some people become ill because they don't repent from something when other people are going around every day not repenting? So needing to fast, but if you recover, or God will, if you stop eating for a certain amount of time, it's a test from God. God's testing us. Well,
oh yeah.
You've gotten that.
Heard that one, yeah.
To teach us a lesson. Maybe not giving enough. I'm not saying I've heard that said to me, but I could imagine, tithing and things like that to religious institutions.
Is karma in there? I've gotten karma a few times.
Karma would be a good one.
Karma.
Yeah, these are all ones that I've just written down purely because they're from my experience. But yeah, go ahead.
Seattle is one of the most agnostic places, one of the most agnostic cities in the United States. So you don't get overt religion weaponized against you that often. But what you see a lot of people have done is they've supplanted God and call everything the universe. Okay. So the universe has a reason. I always push back on that. Just say you're a theist, because if you think there's an omniscient force out there that's weighing in on my health, that is theism, not atheism. And and
the fact that people think there's any remote being weighing in on somebody's health is
that is theism. That, and calling it the universe is not some get out of jail card if you want to sound cool to your friends. I got a lot of in the 90s when I first got sick, when people meant well, but people kept bringing me crystals. And I was like,
well, God,
if it were that easy, going to what Job was saying earlier about the vinegar thing, if it were that easy, no one would be sick.
No, because you just really cheap as well.
I think crystals are really beautiful, but I don't think that's what's going to cure or treat a multisystemic degenerative illness. And during the onset, I was so ill, I couldn't lift my head. My mom or sometimes my friends were helping feed me. So when you can't eat, when you can't, you need help just to get up to go to the bathroom, and someone's like, here's this really pretty rock. Like that's not helpful. And because I was 24 at the time, and I had to move back home with my parents for 4 months, and they were really, really good. But my mom would remind me, honey, people don't know what to say. They mean well. Because I would just want to throw it. Like, here's this rock. I would just want to throw it at them.
Yeah.
So in Seattle, you won't get Christianity weaponized against you so much as the quasi New Age stuff.
Yeah. Which is just as bad and can be even more insidious, I think.
I literally had someone tell me that this was after a major surgery I had in 2001, that she did not visit me after surgery, but that she sent healing thoughts to me in yoga class.
Wow.
We're not friends anymore. I ended the friendship a few months after that. I was like, this is on its last legs. And she was so convinced she'd really done something. Well, I didn't visit you after surgery. And I had a lot of complications, and it was just, but I sent healing thoughts to you in yoga class. It's like, that's...
Yeah, it's. I feel like all of
That's
these
like
things
the,
that people
the
do
prayer and
have
the
a
text.
theme, and
It's,
the
it's all just
theme.
variations on a theme. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's like people don't want to actually engage with you. They
Yes.
don't want to do anything meaningful, so they say something that they believe is imbued with some kind of deep cultural meaning, but it's actually what it is shallow and cruel,
Yes.
um and it all kind of has the stink about it of sort of, for lack of better words, the failure of social care. Like
Mm.
it's a failure of social care to see someone who's profoundly sick and just sort of find a cruel platitude that you're going to put on them. Like somebody literally came up to me and was like, if your relationship with your parents were better, you wouldn't be sick. Like somebody who barely
Right.
knew me, who
Some
has
Wow.
never met my
variation. Yeah.
family. And it, there was a spiritual kind of element to the way she talked about it. And, these people don't know the story of our lives. Like they don't know what that would even look like or mean, or if it's possible, or if your parents are alive, or
Yeah.
there's so much that people don't know about you, and they come up with these things and kind of dart them at you, and um it's not a kindness, and I think it's your mom's not wrong. I think a lot of people don't mean harm. I won't say they mean well, because we'd have to really define our terms here. But it is harmful nevertheless. Um,
Mm. I think
all
one
of
of
these things.
I think one of the things that I was thinking about as well was around the kind of like the responsibility and the blame for the illness falling on the individual.
Right.
So it can't ever be God's fault. So therefore, and it can't be the belief system, the spirituality, the religion, the you know
Right.
Or it can't be just because we're human and we get sick. Well,
no
Oh,
it can't
somebody's
God,
be.
it can't be that.
somebody's got to be to take the responsibility of it somehow for the reason for it. There's got to be a reason for it. So
Well,
therefore,
we
it's
return to this again and again. What terrifies everyone, if we could get a post-infectious illness, and it's usually viral with ME, but we know there are documented cases of mold or perhaps bacteria. If it can happen to us, it can happen to them, and that scares the shit out of them.
Right. So they have to kind of create a separation.
Yeah.
It's like, and it's a way of sort of saying I think
yeah.
to me there's a way that people are saying I'm better than you. Sorry, did I just hit my little mic? I don't even know.
No, you're right.
We can
Well,
hear you.
anyways,
You're good.
um, you know, there is an insinuation of moral superiority or spiritual superiority, or
Mm.
I'm thinking a lot.
Power dynamics.
Yeah, yes, and as long as people are sort of holding on to that as a sort of amulet of self-protection, like the amulet being I pray right, so therefore I'm not going to have what you have. They're actually also kind of doing a disservice to themselves and all their loved ones, because they're going to have loved ones who are disabled, and how are they going to be? And then they could become, I know for me, like because I grew up with sort of spiritual abuse, I never went into any kind of like spiritual mode. I got sick and I was, and I, but I did kind of have, even though I'd had like chronic illness my whole adult life, um, I did have some magical thinking about if I can push through it. I had that thing that a
Mm.
lot of us have, that
Oh,
like,
I was going to say, I think we've all had that at some point. If I try harder, I can get through
Yeah,
this.
yeah.
right. And I had that. And I also just didn't understand the illness that I had because nobody explained it to me. So, for the first 6 months or so, I don't know, I was just like, every day I'm going to get better. I'm going to get,
Right.
today's the day I'm going to get better. It was like Groundhog's Day. And until somebody with an ME sat me down and was like, actually, you're not. And this is why every time you try to take a walk, you pretty much collapse. And I needed somebody to really spell that shit out for me. And it
Mm.
helped me so much. Like, it helps me 3 million times more for someone to tell me the fucking truth, which
Yeah.
is, this is a horrible, horrible illness with um no cure, very few people actually working to find a cure, very little social care, very little medical care. Doctors are going to gaslight you. You need to rest, blah, blah, blah. Like that helped me like in infinity more times than anybody being like,
Because our
just pray
mitochondria
more.
are being attacked and destroyed. So it's metaphorically, if you're telling someone with a broken leg, no, go run a marathon,
Right,
it's not a
exactly.
question of mind over matter. It's physiologically impossible. I think we need to underscore all of us maintain hope. And I think that's true for all three of us. We still have hope. But going to Dove's point, you still have to live. We still have to navigate the world with our bodies under attack. So you have to have a pragmatic understanding of what's occurring within your body. And that's not a question of hope. That's a question of physiology.
And
Right,
reality.
and it's
Yeah.
also, I think it's okay to be hopeless, and I think it's okay to, you know, there's this thing that people talk about accepting illness, and for me that's been really helpful. I think for other people there's other ways of, you know, like tolerating illness or whatever, but for me it's always been much more helpful to accept that this is my condition and maximize sort of capacities within the very limited scope of what I have and find little joys. You know, it is much better for me to do that than to kind of constantly seek for cures or constantly try, you know, because when I try meds, it's often a disaster and sometimes, you know, I think there's this false narrative that like unless we're hoping and trying to get better, we're unworthy of getting better, or we're unworthy of care, or we're unworthy of love, or we're somehow like leeches on the society. And the truth is that we should live in a world where people take care of sick people no matter what. Like that should just be a basic cultural thing. There shouldn't be any bars. You shouldn't have to be hopeful. You shouldn't have to be positive. And that's another thing that's weaponized against us a lot is like, if we were only more positive. And I think that can fall into this sort of spiritual end of what we're talking about.
Yes.
Like if you only had a more positive attitude, you'd be better. Or if you pretended you weren't sick, there's that whole thing of the lightning process. You'd be better.
I had a gastroenterologist say that to me, word for word,
Really?
1991. I'm in a wheelchair. And she said with my mom in the room, she says, try thinking of yourself as a well person. And that I was a well person until 2 months ago and am now in a wheelchair. And again, if my mom hadn't driven me there, I couldn't have even gotten an appointment. Right. This is a doctor who still has her license. I actually looked her up a few weeks ago. She now practices in Colorado. She meant it in a kind way. It was so profoundly hurtful because, again, it put the onus back on me. If you tried harder, think of yourself as a well person. I'm like, I always thought of myself as a well person because I was. Now that I need help chewing my food, it's hard to conceptualize that I'm well because I'm clearly not.
Right.
For me, the biggest, I was telling Dan before we started taping, the biggest mother load of religious toxicity, as I've discussed before, I learned I had thyroid cancer 16 days after my dad died. And so we're preparing for my dad's memorial, and then I'm having to have additional tests, and then I learn it's stage 3. And so everything's happening all at once. And was very close with my dad and am very close with my mom still. So my first cousin calls up, and my dad had been dead like, I don't know, 3 weeks at this point. We're getting ready for his memorial. He calls up out of nowhere. All I did was pick up the phone, goes into this screed that I'm faking the ME, that I'm not really sick, I'm not really disabled, that I just like to be waited on. And by the way, he never would have said this if my dad were still alive, because my dad would have just pounded him. I mean, metaphor, my dad wouldn't have punched him, but my cousin would have wished my dad would have punched him by the time my dad was done with them. Tells me that because I no longer identify as Greek Orthodox, I pray every day. I'm agnostic / believer. I'm inclined to think there's something, but I also don't think I know any answers. He tells me if I still identified as Greek Orthodox, all the prayers that everyone have sent my way, they would have worked. He's like, I've prayed for you, but you're not Greek Orthodox anymore. You're still sick. And I told him, I said, I know you know this because my mom had told his dad. I said, I've been in the ER twice this week. I've got cancer. The tumors were impinging on my trachea. I couldn't breathe. Blah blah blah. He starts laughing. He starts laughing and says, I don't really have cancer. Well, at this point, I haven't slept in weeks, and I just burst out sobbing. And then he keeps laughing. So the kicker is, I haven't spoken to him since.
Yeah, of course not.
The kicker is, when I wrote about this portion of it in the Washington Post, a different cousin contacts me. Well, I didn't think you'd write about family business. I was like, why is no one talking to him about being an unmitigated asshole who's just wickedly cruel? I mean, if we want to discuss who's wicked in the situation, you're weaponizing faith. You're blaming some for. You're saying that I'm
Batman level cruel.
You're saying I don't really have cancer. You wait till the second my dad's dead to do it. Of course,
that's not
right about it.
Yeah,
wow.
How's that?
I love when people go after us for writing about people who have done terrible things, as if it's our job to protect people from their own worst behavior. That's not your fucking job.
Thank you. And the fact that his wife left him and he got fired from his job shortly thereafter, I mean, he's just in a bad place. But it was weirdly validating. But when you talk about not forgiving, I don't actively wish him harm, but no, he's not on my forgiveness list. It's like, no, he's never asked to be forgiven.
I can't imagine how he treats other people. Like, that is not a person who treats people well in general.
Not, and I've heard more since then. You're exactly right. It wasn't just me, but other people he's doing it to, notably, are also sick. And it's like, okay, that
is a person who enjoys cruelty or whatever the fuck.
Yeah.
It's I guess that's the other part of this, is like, you are not really sick is often, and then I don't know, it's like, I think we get that a lot from doctors. We get that a lot. And I'm trying to think of like how that fits in with the spiritual stuff, because I feel like it's very adjacent
it's
to
almost
that.
Almost like we've kind of widened out the subject to just wider societal kind of like, like issues within society. Like we mentioned earlier about the sort of like, were we talking about disabled people almost being like scapegoated for society's ills and things like that, and it feels very much like that in the UK at the minute, with like every day there's like new newspaper headlines about, the government are kind of on the fringe of big cuts to people with disability, and so that could exactly impact me. So I kind of stay away from the news a bit, but it feels like some of these things that we're talking about, or we have been talking about, I've talked about some really kind of we've all talked about kind of personal things in some ways, but things for me that from the impact of evangelicalism on me, and how certain types of thinking, or people that I've come across, and what they've said to me about my illness is very naive, but it plays out throughout society, doesn't it? It's not
Right.
necessarily a religion thing, or it's like a Greek Orthodox thing, or it's just like it's
a Western
Yeah.
it's a Western cultural. I mean, I can't. I wonder if there are people who come from cultures where they don't feel like this is true, whether it's a family culture, a smaller culture within a larger culture, or a larger, however you see that. If you, I would love to hear from people who feel like this is not a part of their cultural story, but I feel like at least, I think there are communities where this isn't true in the US, but I think the broader US culture pushes people towards this idea that their individuality is more important than community care, in a way that, I think it's all about capitalism, exploiting labor, and all that crap. But like, people really take it in, and they get. I think people are so deprived of having their basic needs met here. Like, such a large portion of the population is struggling so hard, and then they're fed this lie that the reason they're struggling so hard is, obviously they have their groups of people, their groups of marginalized people that they like to point at, so that they don't have to point at themselves, because we all know it's the fucking billionaires. But like, um, the the way that, by blaming disabled people for being sick, they can push their sort of eugenics crap, and they can, like the whole thing with COVID, where it's your God-given right to have a gun and shoot people and to not mask so people will die of COVID. Like they're literally
Overright
just
not
trying to get us killed, but they're also trying to create a culture where you think you're better than other people if you can work, and therefore you can dehumanize other people, and therefore it doesn't, you can blame disabled people for your own poverty or your own hardship, and then it also has people literally monitoring us. Like the right wing, or whatever, maybe even not the right wing, has created this army of people who are watching us to make sure that we're disabled enough to use our wheelchairs, that we're disabled enough to get our it's like we have people who know nothing about our lives, and who nothing, they're not doctors, they're not caretakers, and they're coming up to us in the streets and telling us, like, you're not really disabled. How dare you use that parking spot? How dare you use a wheelchair? And
Parking
it's,
spot thing in the United States can get really, just people will go off. Before I needed the walker, when I could still drive, yeah, I had a disabled parking spot, and sometimes I had a cane or crutches, but sometimes I did not. And I had people lose their shit on me. You're not really disabled. And it's like,
yeah,
yeah. Do you know how many hoops you have to jump through to get the disabled placard? Yeah, yeah.
yes.
And hi, random stranger. I'm just trying to get coffee. Why are you in my face, random stranger?
Nobody's ever said it to me, but I did get a really dirty stare from an old lady once. Clearly, these people were looking for a disabled space, and this woman just gave me. She was in the back of this car. She just gave me this terrible, sort of just dirty look, and I thought, oh well, there you go. She can probably actually walk further than me and much more quickly. So yes, sorry, I jumped in. That was my. I just had this
No,
old lady in my head.
I think we've all sort of been looked at like we're outcasts, or like we're harming people by existing, or, like we're not disabled enough to be able to have these things that help us with access. And it's, yeah, I think this is all part of a cultural brew of, like, governments not wanting to pay for social supports, but also government wanting to point the finger at someone else because they're not willing to sort of regulate, and because they're not willing to tax the rich, and because they're not willing to.
That's the horrifying part. In the US, we could easily have universal health care. We're a very rich nation. We don't want to have universal health. Enough people don't want to have it. And there's no reason we can't have it. And I know the NHS is faltering, so I'm not trying to oversimplify British healthcare. But the United States, the number one cause of bankruptcy is medical bills. And that's been true for decades now. We could amend that. We could fix it. We have the money and we have the ingenuity.
Right.
We have an insurance lobby that just floods Congress with money, and going to what all of us, I think this has come up in every episode at some point.
Yeah.
Everyone who has not encountered major illness or disability needs to believe it won't happen to them.
Right. But it will. And I think people, like, one of the things that I was getting from hearing, like, from listening to our conversation as we're having a conversation, is like, I think people think that that being positive is telling you you're not really sick. Being positive is telling you you're going to get better. And and then we get into, like, toxic positivity, but also it's actually not in, it's like the least connecty thing you can say to somebody who's sick. And I think we all kind of, one reason that we all sort of have created a community with each other is because we're able to listen to each other's stories and acknowledge each other's stories, and that feels like connection. And I think that that these kinds of behaviors foment disconnection, and they're never things that help you connect with another human being. And yeah,
And to be clear, at least I think we're all probably on the same page with this too. I'm fine if a loved one says, I don't know what to say. I'm fine with that because you know what? There are times in my own life a loved one has undergone a tragedy and I'm not sure what to say. So I'll usually start with saying words are insufficient. And by asking what I can do physically as my world has shrunk, I'm less able to run errands for that person, for example, or something of that nature, which I used to be able to do at times. And now that's not a possibility at all. But I always offer, if you need to talk, I'm going to pick up. And if you can't sleep, the thing that I offer for everyone who's going through any kind of crisis, 3 a.m. is when the psychic torment, will fully unleash. And at least speaking for all of us on the West Coast of the United States, if it's 3 a.m. on the West Coast, your friends on the East Coast are still asleep too. So when your mind is just embroiled in its own personal hell, I will feel like there's no one to talk to. And I used to volunteer at the crisis clinic before I got sick, and there are times since I have called the crisis clinic, not necessarily actively suicidal, but on the edge and needing someone. And there are loved ones I can wake up, and there are times I have, but you guys know this. We are in physical agony every second of our lives. So if you just called people every time you felt overwhelmed, that's all we'd be doing. We'd be waking up all of our loved ones. But I always put that offer out there. And sometimes people take me up on it. And I feel like that's something I can still do. Call me. If you feel alone at 3 a.m., call me.
right.
And
Imagine.
go no, it's not specific to ME. That's for any crisis.
No, I was just going to say, imagine if every single person who ever told us to pray or told us to do this or that or said we weren't really sick just said, if you need to call me at 3 a.m., call me.
Yeah.
That would have changed everything. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you can ring me anytime you want at 3 a.m. because it's 11 o'clock in the morning for me. I was just trying to work it out. So, yeah.
There you go.
Ring Dan at 3 a.m.
Okay. So yeah, just how do we move on from these things? We've kind of talked about the big macro issues and then the small micro issues and how they impact on our lives today. So the sort of the interplay of the two things, haven't we? In some ways, because we've talked about the sort of the big politics side of things and actually the real sort of personal and how things are. But I think one of the big things is for me, it's just that words do really hurt and they can cause a lot of pain. And actually not, we don't have to accept that, well, I shouldn't be hurt by that word because I'm just being weak or whatever. It's no, that's something that can really, cause upset and we shouldn't have to carry that with us. So, yeah, these are just some bullet points about how do we move on from when we, or live with this sort of impact of either things that people have said or our own internal kind of working model of things because of how we've kind of carried some things that maybe have been indoctrinated into us. So I suppose recognize harm where it's occurred, distance ourselves from situations and people where we may be open to what is effectively abuse. I think when people say those things to us, because it's abusive. Keep reminding ourselves that ME or our illness is not our fault and we have inherent worth as people. Humanism is something that can be really important for us to live our lives with if it's not a religion, because it places the value of people really, and that's really good. We don't have to subscribe to groupthink, so where there are kind of we feel burdened to carry on the thinking or belief systems of a certain institution. You are your own person and that's fine. Right. To think what you think and you don't have to subscribe to the wider belief system. This is not to teach us a lesson. Our illness, our ME, whatever it is not sent to teach us a lesson. It's just crap, ultimately. Seek opportunities for things that bring you peace. Practice self-care and acceptance where possible. Look for support systems outside of the religious or the spiritual system. If a scenario feels uncomfortable, find ways to exit the scenario and set boundaries for the future. And then one question maybe to ask ourselves is, how much does the religion or spiritual practice help or hinder our emotional well-being and the ability to manage our illness? Because if it hinders it, it's important to think about like what we do with that in our lives. And if it helps us, then great. And I want to come back to that. I don't want to dismiss all religion or faith where it's a benefit for us. So yeah. So that's that. One thing I was going to say was, if this is something that people really feel they need support on, or further kind of thinking, or just to talk something through in a group setting, we could set up I know somebody who might be able to help us, somebody who's also willing to be like arm's length, who's a counsellor in religious trauma. So those are the sort of resources that we might be able to tap into as well.
Sure.
So there's a possibility of a Facebook group if people want it and need it. So please speak to us, send us a message, email us at the email address. There's lots of ways to get in touch with us, but do. And if that's something you're interested in terms of being part of a Facebook group, just to talk about some of these issues and chronic illness and ME, then let me know, and that's something we might do. So yeah, thanks for your time. And we don't know where Dove went. We lost Dove.
We lost Dove, and we're not sure what happened. So
because he said he could hear us, so he might still appear, but we've lost him. So sorry. Yeah, that's it. And we may have further episodes about this because I think it's been a really good conversation. And thank you, Litsa, for your part in it as well. So
thank you both. Thanks.
Good
wishes to everyone. Hang in there all.